Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig has shown time and time again that their contributions to modern cinema is both valuable and refreshing. Gerwig especially has shown that she's a force to be reckoned with, mostly because of her stellar directorial output, which is praised by the public and critics alike. In the 2012 Noah Baumbach directed film Frances Ha, her skills as a writer and actress are quite clear. Baumbach and Gerwig come together to create a truly complex but grounded character. Someone with obvious flaws and strong points, both of which become clear when she's put into dire circumstances. Despite Frances's unusual predicament, she is always relatable and the viewer stays invested in the story. Gerwig, of course, brings the character to life, even though she wasn't planning on playing the role initially, a suggestion made by Baumbach. As a Baumbach film, this is surely one of his most notable. His signature focus on average people with average problems is done with the usual care and skill. Much like his previous projects and projects after, Frances Ha relies heavily on its characters and actors to carry the film. The film was both inspired by the French New Wave and the sentiments of student filmmaking. In the DIY spirit of the French New Wave creators, an artistic choice was made to shoot the entire film on the Canon 5D Mark II, which is by no means a cinema camera and is more of a consumer product. This did lead to issues with focusing and framing, but it's hardly noticeable in the film. Noah's style of filmmaking is quite simplistic and non-decorative, but this is not merely an aesthetic choice. The non-ornate rhetorical style grants a sense of immediacy to the events on screen, making the film feel more natural and real. Of course, despite the straightforward presentation, Baumbach is extremely detail-orientated, especially in the way he choreographs scenes, but despite his perfectionist sentiments, he still tries to reach a sense of spontaneity. In a Vice interview, Gerwig mentions that the scene where Frances shows Sophie, Liv's and Benji's apartment took 20 plus takes to do, and this was mostly because of scene choreography.
It was very stripped down, but it was highly controlled. It was very choreographed. I'm thinking particularly if there's a scene, Sophie comes over to this apartment I'm living at with the boys for the first time, and I come in and I put a record in its place and I talk to her and then I go get us whiskeys and I come back around. I think we did that over 35 times. I'm not rich.
You are rare.
We need whiskeys.
We see this attention and use of choreography in his other films as well. It may not seem special, but it requires a lot of coordination from its actors, but Baumbach achieves it every time. Frances Halliday is a charming 27-year-old dancer who lives in New York and seems to enjoy it, with her roommate and best friend Sophie. Frances's life is thrown into turmoil when Sophie decides to move to a more expensive neighborhood, one that Frances cannot afford. This strains her relationship with Sophie and sends her into a personal crisis. Thus, she, to the best of her abilities, makes the best of a pretty bad situation. In her directionless quest, we see a lot of her strong points. Frances has a real lust for life and keen sense of humor. The opening shot of two grown women play fighting is such a great illustration of their close relationship and general attitude toward life. It presents a lightheartedness and playfulness that is so indicative to who Frances is. She always has a piece of witticism for any situation and isn't scared to inject it into a conversation, even at the risk of no one getting it. It's a sign of her intellectualism, but she's never openly pretentious about it. She becomes more aware of it after Benji points it out, with his undateable catchphrase, even though she was already pretty self-aware. Frances's own lust for life and optimism is also visually solidified in a scene where she's running down the New York sidewalk, smiling and doing dance moves along the way, even though things aren't going great. In addition, it also shows her ability to adapt to change, even though she doesn't respond to it well. It's like that idiom, with the water on the goose or duck's back. She finds solutions for her problems and doesn't go into a state of unproductive panic. Despite being pretty awkward, she still uses her people skills to solve her personal problems. She self-censors sometimes, but she still has poetic moments of self-expression. Noted in the scene where she tells a party guest what she wants in a human relationship, and life in general. It's moments like these that make her so much more sympathetic, since we're pulled into her perspective. Frances is of course an extremely flawed character, and we'll get into that in a moment. But she's continually trying to learn from her mistakes even if she fails time and time again. In a lot of ways, Frances directly contributes to digging her own grave. She doesn't communicate with Sophie or her ex-boyfriend clearly enough, resulting in a predicament where she can no longer stay with Sophie or her boyfriend. Somehow, she alternates between being stubborn and too easily swayed. When she is offered a job at the dance company that could bring relief to her rent problem, she turns it down for a much less glamorous job at her old college. Her lack of personal conviction is shown where she tries to be proactive, even when she only attempts the minimum. When she has a whole Sunday planned to take care of fairly important tasks, she opts for bagels instead. It's a sign of her impulsivity, which has detrimental consequences on her relationship with Sophie. When she goes out with Sophie and Patch, she acts unreasonably selfish and aggressive. She doesn't know how to deal with abandonment and refuses to even support Sophie's decision. It's also her impulsivity that makes her go to Paris alone, even though she technically can't afford it. This all highlights her emotional and personal immaturity. Visually, this is represented through her messy room and even her messy hair. She has a lack of control and direction over her own life. She's emotionally dependent on Sophie, and when she doesn't have her anymore, she starts turning to Benji and Lev, even though both of them don't have it all together either. Lev being an artist and Benji being a struggling writer writing a script for Gremlins 3. Through this, we also get a sense of her insecurity, visually illustrated on how she picks her face and looks at herself in the mirror too much. It shows a lack of acceptance, not only in how she looks, but also who she is and who she wants to be. Frances is a great character, and a lot of work is done visually and texturally to add layers to who she is. But, of course, what really brings her to life is Gerwig herself. She has said that the character is shared equally between her and Noah's contributions, but it's still difficult to know where Frances ends and Gerwig begins. Her acting is so honest, and the comedic timing she brings to the character is perfect. Her immense skill to assimilate into a character is shown in even the most quote-unquote mundane scenes. In the sequence where Frances attends a dinner party with Rachel, Gerwig's acting and Baumbach's incredible directing is displayed in the most subtle of ways. The scene is somewhat forgettable, but it's such a great example of how Baumbach and Gerwig bring so much life to the character, highlighting her awkwardness, charm, and uncanny knack for winning people over in the smallest of ways. By the end of the film, Frances realizes that she needs people in her life, but that she also needs to be independent and mature as a person. The audience already realizes this, with help of two scenes, which was clearly juxtaposed against one another. We learn that Frances needs the network of people in her life when she goes back to her home in Sacramento. It is probably the warmest moment in the film and provides a break from the tensions of New York life. Her need to be independent and mature is made clear when she goes to Paris alone. Interestingly enough, the scene also emphasizes why she needs a network too. Her loneliness and unhappiness is clear, and she even tries to reach out to people. We also get a clear expression of her need for a true emotional connection with someone through a monologue in the dinner party scene. Another video essayist, who goes by the name American Knight, has also talked about Francis's wants and needs. It's definitely worth checking out, and the link is in the description. The final sequence of the film provides a satisfying arc to Francis's journey. She finally has a job, she's choreographing her own dances, and she's in touch with the important people in her life, and most importantly, she has her own apartment. Throughout the film, she constantly surrounds herself with people, and when she is alone, she's unhappy. However, when she sits in solitude looking at her new living space, she smiles. She can finally accept being alone and being independent. Among film lovers, Frances Ha is pretty well known and appreciated, but it still feels like a shame that the film goes overlooked sometimes. It's definitely a highlight in Baumbach's directing catalogue and Gerwig's writing and acting career. It's a short and simple film, and it definitely fits into the hipster canon, but doesn't fall in the trap of over-quirkiness and pandering. It's a film that confronts the anxieties of loneliness and maturity, but still manages to be one of the most heartwarming films out there.